Kathy, go ahead and turn the screen over to me, hon. Just a second. Okay, show my screen. Let me do that. Let me click on this. Just a second. Whoops, where the heck did it go? Hold on, folks. I want to just... I'm looking at a new screen, DJ. I just want to minimize this. Look, start my first webinar of the new year, and I'm already have some technical difficulties. They did the change to meeting, and I didn't realize that. All I want to do is minimize that. I don't want to quit. Screen sharing, go down at the bottom. I'm sorry, folks. Hugs and stitches to all of you. This little technical challenge. Now, let's take a look right there. I don't know if you can see it, but we are now out of, we have 1,000 people that are available to join the webinar. We are up to currently 962, and the list is growing. I will announce that that is probably the largest webinar that we've ever given. What a way to start the year. Miss Kathy, can I have a woohoo? Oh, I miss your woohoos, Miss Kathy. I can't woohoo like Miss Kathy. Good evening, everyone. Hugs and stitches to you all. I have to start out by telling you that I am very, very excited about the webinars this year. Starting with the next one, we've got something brand new we're going to release to you as an educational format. We're going to change it a little bit this year. I think it's going to amplify it a great deal, and I'm looking very forward to those. Let me explain tonight's webinars, and we'll go ahead and get going, getting the most out of your software. Look, what I'm going to do over the next hour or so is I'm going to break it down into elements. We're going to start with making designs run better. I guess what I'm saying is, as I want to, because you know what, there's so much to cover. I can just stick on like the editing side, and I could be there for an hour, 2 hours just covering it. I want to hit highlights of all of, or several of the elements within the software that I think in getting started and already using it, things that should be utilized, things that I think many of you are utilizing, but I'm going to try to amplify it some for you. So I want to talk about, number one, making designs run better. The editing side of the software. It is indeed, in my opinion, where I think we all need to start when we first start working with the software. Look, we all have thousands of designs. We all have designs that run magnificently. We all have designs that you hope to God you're never going to put on your embroidery machine again. Well, the purpose of editing and making designs run better, it's kind of twofold. Certainly, it affects the runnability of a design on your machine. It's going to make that design run better. But it also, to some extent, is like pre-digitizing. It's a way in the manipulation of the designs that you can see a higher level of control. I will explain as I go through some of these features right now what and where you should look within a design. I'm going to explain and talk about measuring designs a little bit because, quite honestly, the software does a lot of things automatically, but I think it's heightened by understanding why it's changing it. And the knowledge of measuring your design. So in this part, I'm going to talk a lot about the ruler. The concept of measuring, learning where, what, and how to measure on a design amplifies your knowledge, folks. Look, from this point on, designs that run extremely well, there's a reason why they run well. Designs that do not run well, there is a reason why designs don't run well. I want to bring some of that to light. So number one, let's talk about just some of the editing features that you have. Over here on the left side of your screen, you know what, I'm actually going to bring up just another design. I'm so sorry. Let me get something else opened up here. But over on the left side of the screen, you indeed have your editing tools. I'll just bring up a simple lettering design, okay? Your first selection that you have here is your select tool. The select tool is really quite a wonderful aspect of the editing of it. It's something that I utilize an amazing amount. Basically, what select does by choosing it, you can select different elements of the design. If I want to select the underlay, I can just put the cursor on there. I can select the underlay. At this point in time, I can right click and you have your ability to do things. You can delete it if I want to pull the underlay out of that. You can delete the underlay. At this point in time, I could select like the whole letter. I could add underlay. So your select tool, it allows you to select individual elements. By clicking on the satin stitch, I can grab individual pieces or the entire satin stitch. Because this design was done in elements, this part of the W done first, you know what, I should have probably done this. Let me select it all. Whenever you want to select the entire design, you hit the select tool and hit Control A. That'll select everything. What I'm going to simply do is just a right click. I'm going to change it to red. Why? Because it was blue lettering and my select choice is blue right now. So now if I select on it, you'll see how that turns blue. Because the W was done in basically multiple segments, meaning that I started, ended, started again, and ended digitizing the W. As I click on different pieces of the satin stitch, you'll see that these three lines, when you see that, that's just telling you it was all digitized in one segment, okay? That's why as you look at select, and let's say you want to grab the entire W, well, I'm grabbing this one, all I'm grabbing is that element there. When you see that, simply because I did my first element of the satin here, finished here, then I started a new element. Then as I progressed through it, I did all three of those as one element. Don't let that confuse you, because if you want to grab the whole W, you go to the icon down below it, which is the lasso tool, which at that point I can lasso the whole W, right click, and it'll select the entire structure. So you have some wonderful select tools. Let's go ahead and move on. You have your shape tool. It's for manipulation, meaning if I want to change or manipulate this element of the W, I can select it there. I can then go down to shape. At this point in time, I can change angles, I can change shapes, I can curve, because you have your Bezier curve, right click, and it'll end the sequence, okay? I'm not going to talk a lot about the slice tool. Also, these I've covered to quite some great extent into the past, but basically what you're looking at here and everything that I've demoed so far, especially when you get to shape, it's block editing. It's giving you the ability to select an entire structure or an element of that structure where you can control start points. Want to move the start points are green. Another thing I love about the software is color coded. I can move a start point. End points are red. I can move an end point. You have full control, total control, start point, end points, angles. The blue squares are shapes. That's called, or what I've always called, block editing. So in the editing features, you have a full complement of block edit. Now, at this point in time, I'd like to go over here to the control panel or to the properties box, because over here, you also have a wonderful ability to input start commands, end commands, tie-ins, tie-offs. Start command is basically controlling from where you start a design to the movement of the first stitch. It can be done, and I always just preset it normal, because basically in a normal it's doing it with what we call a needle up stitch. You can change it into a jump stitch. You can implement trims with your start command, meaning before the needle inserts, at any given color change, it's always gonna put a trim. Whether the design was created with that trim, it'll put it in there. You can tell it to stop. That means anytime that you move from, let's say, a color, it finishes one color, it's ready to change color to another color, you can implant a stop. You have a wonderful level of control. Frame out is what you would quite simply, as I can put it, utilize when you're doing appliques. Your properties box here is an amazing place of control within any design. You do have your command feature, everything that you want to do here. You can also, this is where you select fabrics with appliques. Everything is done here. Your underlay is done here. If I want to, again, grab that W and I want to add underlay, I can lasso that entire W, right click, it selects it all. At that point in time, I can come to my underlay. Excuse me, my underlay is right here. Come into it, I can say, you know what, I want a center line with a double zigzag and simply apply it. so you have full and total control. Look, I want to be very honest too. One of the things about manipulating a design, and this only has to do with stock embroidery data. As I've started and as I'm teaching more elevated, advanced type classes, one of the things we still have to figure out within the software is that when you go through like Save to Sew, you're working with a stock embroidery design and you want the proper underlay within a design. I'm going to be in upcoming classes talking about good underlay and how you can recognize it. Because one of the things the software is not yet capable of knowing or determining is what underlay. The software can see if something is a running stitch, a satin stitch, or a fill stitch. Quite simply, those are mathematical beats. What the software can't always recognize is the underlay done with either running stitches or, in the case like when I digitize, look, I want to get back to where this design was at the very beginning. Okay, and I'll put back on the initial underlay. Let me bring it up right there. Okay, you see all this underlay right here, folks? This is manually stitched underlay. When working with designs that come from the era where I digitized, most of our underlay was done with a manual stitch, okay? The stitch lengths, and if I go ahead and mark the stitches, the stitch ends, which are my needle penetration points, as you look at them, you'll see they're varying lengths. Whenever you see that, that's telling you that it's a manually laid stitch. Now, why even bring that up? Because look, as I go through the Save to Sew feature and I pick a material type, the software is going to input the proper underlay for that material. But the issue is this. If you're working with an old design like this one is 20 some years, this one about 10 years old, a little more than that, and I've used manual stitching, the software cannot yet determine a manual stitched underlay. So let's say I pick fleece and it's going to add a center line with a double zigzag. It'll add it, but what it won't do is it will not currently take out the old underlay. So in some cases, you can end up with, while I believe you can't really have enough underlay, to some extent you can. I've used 2 to 3 underlay on this design, adding another 2 to 3 straights and then a double zigzag. That's a little bit of overkill, okay? So one of the things as we progress this year, I am going to talk a lot about underlay and the ability to recognize a design that has a lot of underlay. The point for that is that as I'm going through Save to Sew, when I see a design that has plenty of underlay, a lot of times in Save to Sew, I'll turn off the underlay feature. That control is in there for that purpose. It is up to me, and I guarantee I will show you as we progress. In fact, it'll happen in the next 1 or 2 webinars. I'm going to concentrate a lot on underlay, the ability for you to recognize when there is sufficient underlay. Now, I'll tell you, we're still just getting started with this software. I think that DJ and I have figured out a way for the software to recognize random stitched underlay, because my dream, or one of the things that I'd like to see advance, is that when you go through Save to Sew, I would like to see the software remove all of the old underlay so that it will put in the perfect amount and the right underlay as we switch from fabric to fabric. If that's above some of your heads, I apologize. I don't mean it to be, but it is one of the issues that I see when you're learning how to manipulate, edit, and read embroidery data. It's the ability to recognize when a stitch that's there should be there. It's the ability to know when to turn on that underlay feature, turn it off, or to leave it on. Okay, so again, you do have your full complement of block editing. You have a slice feature. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but the last thing that I'll talk about right here is that you also have your stitch edit, okay? Stitch edit simply means when you select it, you're now manipulating individual stitches, okay? Well, look, where would you use something like that? Are you ever going to need the ability to stitch edit? Look, let me show you just a simple little trick. I'll bring up a new screen, and I'm just going to make a couple letters next to each other. I can put just a very simple A next to an A, okay? One of the things, and it's a pet peeve in mine, that has always been when I'm working with font technology. Actually, I should have changed that letter. Let me put it next to a letter I. Okay, one of the things that has always bothered me about font technology is that when you finish a letter and it's now moving into the next letter, okay, from the A into the I, if done without a trim, and with small letters, it's going to do it in most cases without a trim. There's a thread that goes from the last part of the A here that steps into the I, okay? Excuse me, folks, but that thread drives me crazy. I hate that stitch. It shows. It drives many of you crazy. In fact, I am compelled when I'm running my machine to stop it and to cut that thread out, okay? First of all, the reason that it shows is that when you finish this A and you step into the letter I right here, you've elongated the stitch. Basically, that stitch is floating on top of the material. That's why it shows. Why bring that up? Because here's a little trick done with stitch editing. How you hide that stitch, because look, for every rule, there's an exception to the rule. When I talk about things like running stitches, I'll talk, and one of the rules is stitch length. And basically, if you want a running stitch to show on your fabric, the length of stitch that you use is basically from 1 to 4 millimeters. When you want to hide a running stitch, you throw them at lengths shorter than a millimeter, 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter in length, okay? So watch what I'm going to do. Again, I've left the A here, I step into the letter I here. This thread sticks out like a sore thumb. Here's a little trick. Grab your stitch editing tool, select it with a left click. One of the things I love about stitch editing is without marking, because look, if I come down here and I show my stitch ends, my needle penetration points, you'll see where all the stitches lay, okay? Where the actual, every one of these little squares that you see is actually where the needle is penetrating. One of the things I love about my software is this. I'll turn that off. Without having the needle penetrations marked, and if you are in stitch editing, when you get close to a stitch, like I get over to this one right here, you see how that just highlighted with that big black dot? That's a needle penetration point. Look, I'm touching nothing, folks. As you get near a penetration point within the software sees it and it shows it to you, okay? So what I'm going to do, now I'll tell you that because of the lock stitch involved in finishing the letter A, because I always end with a lock stitch. It's the most important stitch. Getting back to that properties box. When you get into your commands in the properties box, you always want a tie in and a tie off. If you've ever trimmed this thread out and the thread unravels or the letter before unravels, it's because it was not locked in place. Without a lock stitch, you have no embroidery. It will unravel. Make sure in the properties box that you have your tie-in and tie-off set. You have some options. You can do it normal. There's 3 or 4 options that you can go in there. 3 options, I believe. So rather than trying to find the last needle penetration here because of that lock stitch, I always look for the first needle penetration in the next letter. I go into Stitch Edit. I come over here to the letter I. As I get close, and you see the little dotted line, well, if I go to the end of that, you'll see the stitch. Left click on it and you grab it, but at the same time that I grab it, I now manipulate it, and that just tells me, okay, because the one to the left is stationary, but I'm moving the one to the right, that's telling me basically I've grabbed the right stitch. At this point in time, simply right click and say insert before that stitch, and I'm going to click on that. Now, I'm going to come to the bottom left of the letter I, and I'm just going to left click. I'm going to come 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter over or so, left click. Come a little bit further along that line, left click. A little bit further, left click. We'll do one more, left click, and then I always end on the letter, left click. Right click ends the sequence. Now, if I generate the needle penetration points, boom, you'll see that I've now dropped tiny little stitches from letter to letter. Those stitches will drive down into the fabric. You will not see them, and you'll never have to trim that thread out again. Plus, you followed really one of the top rules in embroidery. Embroidery is best laid in a continuous filament of thread. If you're not lifting, moving, if you're not trimming, the embroidery is always going to run a little better. I promise you, it'll always run a little better. I do everything I can to minimize trims and to move from position to position with tiny little stitches. I'll tell you a little bit about my dream list. That's also one of the things I'd like to see us advance to within the software itself. Some of these things that I dream of are stretching the bounds of what software has ever done, and stretching certainly the ability of the people who write my code for me. But you know what? Telling them, one of the things I love about guys who write code, who we DJ and I'll say, look, make it do this. It's their ability to make it do that. I love working with guys and girls who write code. There's nothing I've thrown at them to date that they have not been able to accomplish. We just haven't gotten to that. But what I would like to see in the future is to select a letter, grab the next letter, and say connect. I don't exactly know the terminology, but it would then automatically drop those tiny little stitches. Currently, you do it manually. Now, the minute you're in Stitch Edit, you click on that point and you right click and say insert before. The stitch you're actually laying is a manual stitch. You're throwing basically one stitch at a time data. The manual stitch, as we talk about it later, probably the stitch you're going to use the least, but it would be remiss of me not to tell you that when you are in Stitch Edit and you're implanting stitches, you're working with a manual stitch. What I love about that is when you start manually stitching, learning a little bit about it, it's like taking a trip back 130 years in this process, folks. From the inception of mechanized embroidery, it was always done one stitch at a time. Why I relate a lot of what I've tried to do and am doing with the software is it reverts back to the beginning. Embroidery was not only laid one stitch at a time or produced one stitch at a time, no matter how programming develops over the years, the magic wand, the ability to click and convert into stitches and that. The one thing it always has to be based on is embroidery has and always will run one stitch at a time. That's why in 100 and almost 30 years now into the process, it's never changed. It's always run the same. And has always for me been based on a one stitch at a time application and the material's ability to understand that and to manipulate it to bring it to really the highest level of runnability that it can be. So you have your Stitch Edit. You also have within the software the ability to optimize sequence. Let me give you just a quick little demo on this. And these, again, while it does so much, these are simply features that I love to use within the software. I'm just going to bring up a piece of artwork. You know what? I'll just bring up this little flower. I've used it for a long time, but I'm going to go ahead and use it again. Let me just change the size here a little bit. So we're working with something a little bigger. And then let's just view it on the screen to fit. Now look, I'll get back to this a little later, but I'm going to go ahead and just digitize with the magic wand this little top aspect of the flowers here, okay? So I'm going to left click, right click, then I'm going to come down here, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Okay, that's digitized. But now, and this happens with a lot of data. The sequencing that was used on this, it's not really proper. And what I mean by that, let me turn off the needle penetrations too. When I just digitize this, I digitize this element first, then this element, then that element, then that element, then that element. I don't know why digitizers do that, but I do see that in a lot of designs created. It's out of sequence, meaning two things. Number one, it should have been digitized probably this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. That would be the proper sequence. But because it moved back and forth across, I'm now implementing trims or movement stitches between each element. I'm not a real fan of that. Look, one of the things that happens, especially if you have a machine that trims, okay, you'll notice that after a lot of trims, you'll have what you'll perceive as thread breakage. It's not really thread breakage. It's what I call thread pullout. When a needle is lifted and the thread is trimmed and it moves into position and reinserts the needle, it actually takes 4 to 7 revolutions of the hook down below to retie to the top thread. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have seen that the needle will drop. It'll move 2 or 3 or 4 times. No thread is being picked up. Then all of a sudden it picks up the thread and it continues on. Why you get a perceived thread break at that point in time is because of that the revolutions necessary to retie to the top thread. Your thread take-up lever, which is pulling thread towards the needle, because it's not locked currently to the bobbin, you're pulling thread out of the needle. That's why I like to eliminate trims, all right? So here's a little trick. Now, the software always had this ability, and again, if we review this, it's going to do that one first, then it's going to do that one, then it's going to do that one, okay? Well, if I wanted to change the sequence, I could actually come over here to the sequence view. I could grab any one of these, okay, and move it into another position. So now if I came in and did it, you'll see with just that one move right there, okay, I just went that one, then that one, then that one. I changed the sequence on it. We always gave you the ability to do that, all right? But we amplified that when we created this. Look, all I'm going to do is select that entire color, and we built an icon, and I use it a lot, optimize the sequence. When you click optimize the sequence, you just change the running order. Now if you look at it, it's going to stitch that one, then that one, then that one, then that one, then that one. Much more logical from a digitizing standpoint, from a runnability, editing standpoint to optimize your sequence. It's something I use anytime I see any kind of crazy movement within a design. And realize too, I'll point out that I use my slow redraw a lot. Slow redraw is watching a digitizer digitize. He or she, you're watching them create a design by watching them sequence. So normally I bring up a stock embroidery design, something I've never run before. The first thing I do with it is I use the slow redraw tool. I want to see how it was created because that gives me the choices and the level of editing that I want to do with it. Now, I've optimized the sequence, but if you'll notice too, as I've optimized the sequence, that it started there and it finishes up there. The end point is up there. Then it made a movement down to this element right here. Well, you know what I've done? I still have all of those trims in there. One of the things that I want to do is that if I want to move from this element to this element, I actually want the stop point right here. And then in this one, I want the start point right here. Well, can I do that? Absolutely, because within the software, you have this wonderful level of control again. I can select that complex fill. I can come to shape. It's color coded. You see how the stop point is right here? Well, I could move the stop point right down to there. Okay, excuse me, I moved the start. I can move the stop right down to there. Then I'd have to go into this element. It's still on shape. I'll actually put this one over here, but now I have my start point. I would want it right there, okay? Why? Because now it's going to complete this and move into here. That's closest point connect. That eliminates trims. But you know what? I don't want to have to go through that. You always had that ability within the software, moving start points, moving end points. You don't have to do any of it anymore, folks. All you have to do is, once again, I will select the color. The first step that I do, again, is optimizing the sequence. Once the sequence is optimized, select it again, and right next to that is called Optimize Your Entry Exit, and click on it. Do you see what just happened? Basically, optimizing entry exit is putting the stop point, the closest point to the new start point of the next element. It automatically changes start and end points. And you'll see, because the way that I have manipulated it, changed the whole thing, it's now going to run from this one to this one to this one to this one to this one, guaranteed. But you know what else I just did? Because of that wonderful optimize the entry exit, where this one stops, it's the closest point to the next element. That's amazing. I mean, that truly is amazing. What I just did was I made the design run better by optimizing the sequence, and then by automatically changing the start points and exit points, I just eliminated all those trims. The machine will run better, and again, run better. For some of us, you know what, it doesn't really matter that it takes a little extra long, but my opinion is the better the design runs, the more fun you have when you're embroidering. There's nothing more I love than putting a blessed design on my software, on my machine, and it runs like a dream. I always said what makes a design really beautiful for me is that it runs as good as it looks. Now, why I kind of keyed in on those choices, because what I'm going to get to next is the save to sew. Save to sew for me in editing is a highlight. Basically, save to sew is an auto correction process that you go through. Designs that don't run well will run better when you go through save to sew, but I keyed in on that because when I do my initial slow redraw, I'm looking at the sequence. So let's go ahead and bring up a design. I bring up a design like this. I'm going to come into my slow redraw and I'm going to watch it run, okay? Turn it on and I'm going to watch it run. We'll have it go nice and fast, okay? So it did that element. Doing that element, well, you know, they're pretty much joined at closest point. The sequencing is really not that bad on that. I might have done it a little different, but it actually walked over to here. But see, you've got trims here, so I could optimize the sequence in that very easily. So I'm watching it run. Now it's coming into the green element. I'm going to grab it so we can watch it faster. Sequencing on that is fine, okay? The black sequencing is fine, okay? I have no issue with the sequencing. I do have in the red. So I'm going to use save to sew. The routine that I would utilize, I'd select the red. I'd come in and I would optimize the sequence, okay? And I just changed the order of it. I would also select it one more time and I'm going to optimize my entry exit. Hence, I just eliminated all those trims and I put it in a more elevated sequence of how that runs. The green and the black was fine. Now, one of the things in here where I'm going to talk about measuring a little bit, when I look at a design and determining whether a design is going to run well or not, I look at stitch types and the stitch types that they're next to. I'm going to cover this a lot as we go through it. Many of you have already sat through my compensation classes, but basically what I do at this time is I grab the ruler. You see how I have the green next to the green here? I measure the overlap, how much it overlaps into the next one. That's 4/10 of a millimeter. That is actually a fill stitch next to a fill stitch. When you put a fill next to a fill, the amount of overlap that you need to see is 1 millimeter or more. Let me explain for those of you that are new to this. Embroidery, folks, is an art form of distortion. When stitch types meet another stitch type, they need to overlap. Why? Because we have a couple of rules in embroidery that never change. I call them the constants of embroidery. The first constant is what we call pull. Stitches are going to pull into other stitches, okay, against other stitches. When you measure an overlap less than the numbers that over this next year I'm going to drill into your head, when I measure that and that's under a millimeter, that's telling me that when I run these stitches, I'm going to get a gap in between that. Here I have a fill stitch next to a satin stitch. The amount of overlap that needs to take place is also a millimeter, 6/10 of a millimeter. That's telling me before I run it, I'm going to get a gap right here. Then I'll always measure the narrowest satin stitch in the design. I'll cover this a lot as time goes on, but I'll tell you right now, the narrowest satin stitch you should ever measure in embroidery is 1.4 millimeters, 1.4. So I measure the width of the satin stitch, 9/10 of a millimeter. With two measurements and one width measurement, this design is telling me when I run it, I'm going to get a gap right here, I'm going to get a gap right here, and then you know what? Then it's going to eat your garments. Garments get eaten when you apply satin stitches under 1.4 millimeters to a knit fabric per se. Why do digitizers digitize like that? Why wouldn't they make it the right width? I'm not going to go a lot into this, but I'll tell you real quickly, the greatest challenge, or one of them in this industry, is when people create designs for you all, they sample their designs on solid fabrics, twill, scrim felt. You know what, folks, quite honestly, you might as well be stitching on wood. You see, those are fabrics that are solid in nature, woven very tightly, there's no stretch to them, it holds a stitch better. In my entire life as an embroiderer, I've never eaten a piece of twill or canvas. I eat 60-40 poly cotton blends, knit fabrics basically. Those are stretchy fabrics that the stitch, as it ties the knot in the bobbin case, they pull, and that's why they separate. It's an art form of distortion. The measurements, knowing how much to overlap, is a key part of understanding embroidery. So again, I've covered a little bit. Fill next to fill is 1 millimeter or more. Fill next to satin is 1 millimeter or more. So with a couple of measurements, this design is telling me it's not going to run that well. So look, here's why Save to Sew was actually created, because you come in and say File and Save to Sew. At this time, you pick your fabric, okay? More than 60 fabrics in here right now. When we started, it only had 30. We've added 35 new fabrics, and we'll have new fabrics coming out. But I'm going to tell it I'm going to run it on fleece. Now, I'm going to, again, in the webinars upcoming, I'm going to concentrate like on this feature for an entire hour. But right now, I want to make you all aware that you have 3 choices in every fabric. Magic Wand, I digitized, and I didn't digitize, okay? How do you know which one to choose? Well, the reason that there's 3 is when you select Magic Wand, you're actually telling the software, I'm working with a design that has 0 overlap. You see, when you work with the Magic Wand and you put a color next to another color, it doesn't know to overlap. It's a design that has no overlap. When you choose I digitized, you're working with a design, you're telling the software, I am working with a design that has overlap, but not enough. Now, there's a lot of designs you'll look at that you have plenty of overlap. A lot of the designs that I've created, look, my designs are touted as some of the finest running designs in the world. The reason is that I overlap more than most digitizers. So when you make the choice of I didn't digitize, you're actually telling the software you're looking at a design that has plenty of overlap. Magic Wand means no overlap. I digitize means some but not enough. I didn't digitize means plenty. In fact, that's what I'm going to change it to. When everybody has gone through these classes, I'm going to change it to none, some, and plenty. I think it'll be more clear for people. I do have upcoming videos to make that very clear. So I'm going to choose fleece, but what choice would I make? I would choose I digitized. Why? I'm telling the software I'm looking at a design that has overlap, but not enough. Next, apply, and yes, it's going to put in the proper density, the proper underlay, and the proper amount of overlap. Next, and again, the highlight of Save to Sew for me is not only its auto manipulation value, it's this right here. It's now taking all the guesswork out of this process. It's telling you how to stabilize it, okay? And then when you hit finish, you saw in the design, thank you for the woohoo. Oops, sorry. It clicked off before I did it right. I'm sorry. I don't know why that happened. Just a second. I picked my fleece. I didn't digitize. Next, apply. And yes, tells you how to stabilize it, and boom, the magic has just taken place. It's added the proper underlay, the proper distortion values, and the proper overlap. That's uncanny. That is, and in conclusion of this part, for me, where you get started. When I get started within the editing, and as I teach people, it is the ability to manipulate. I do indeed use the stitch edit. I do indeed use the block edit. I always make sure the stops and the trims are activated. I will almost always optimize the sequence, the entry exit, and then always go through the Save to Sew feature within the software. It is a highlight of it. I've got a lot to cover, but if there are any questions, Kath, I'm only going to take a couple of questions because I have a lot to cover and I already know I'm going to run out of time. So, Miss Kathy, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why does it matter? Why is the underlay and why is the overlap? Because density has nothing to do with the constant of pull. Pull is a natural occurrence. The design could be a bulletproof design as far as rigidity. It can have so much density, it'll distort your fabric. But density does not control pull. They're two separate things. Density is how close you put your stitches. The amount of overlap that takes place is based on the fact that embroidery is an art form of distortion. You see, if I go back to where it was, okay, well, I can come in and change the setting of density. Look, I can grab that black. If I want to add more density, even just manipulate it myself, I can put in the density that I want, click apply, and it'll change the density. See how much tighter it got? That has nothing to do with the overlap, okay? The overlap is a different issue. The overlap aligns everything or allows everything to line up correctly. The density directly has to do with the feel. Does it feel like butter in your hand? Does it feel bulletproof? That's why you have three values. Density, I guess as simply as I can put it, controls the feel, the hand of the embroidery. Underlay, and why it manipulates underlay are your lofting stitches, okay? What an underlay does is an underlay lifts. So when I come in here and hit File and Save to Sew, and then I come in and pick like a piece of just knit, and I tell it I want knit. I'm stitching on a knit shirt, and I digitized it. Next, apply, and yes. Tells me how to stabilize it, but boom, watch what happens, okay? Number one, it altered the density. Density being how close the stitches are. It increased the overlap. That controls the constant of things lining up. And then it added underlay. If you looked at this design before I manipulated it, there's no underlay in that design. Those stitches tend to sink into the base fabric. Underlay are lofting stitches. They bring the top stitch up and out of the base fabric. We will have classes. I could teach 2 days on just the underlay values within an embroidery design. That's why, look, this is a wonderful feature because it does it for you automatically. Where I want to elevate it this year is I want you to know why. And I want you to be able to recognize when there's enough, when there's not enough. Because in total control, it's what you have. So while the software, and for those of you who just want a feature of clicking, grabbing, and changing how well it runs, it's there for you. But a majority of you, so many of you that I meet out there, you want more control than that. It takes those of you who want to digitize and want to edit, it takes you into a whole nother level of embroidery creation. Why it happens and how you can control it. And then the ability to look at it and to recognize it before you ever run it. Oh my gosh, it's just I mean, I may be getting crazy because this is something that it's a passion for me. It's my life. It's what I do. I eat, dream, I think embroidery. I can't help it, but understanding why it does it, how you can control it, and then the ability within this software to manipulate it, it's uncanny. And truly, we're still just getting started. In my opinion, you folks, you haven't seen nothing yet. DJ and I sit here and we ponder and we know what we're capable of making this software do, what it's capable of doing. And I'll tell you, we're just getting started. Wait till you see some of the things we've got coming up. It's an ability, look, getting the most out of your software. Yes, it's automated to some extent, but if you want to study it, there is a way. The software, good running data will teach you. I'll get back to that in a little bit. I'll take one more question. Kath, did that answer yours? Yes. Well, let me show you. Here, that's a very good question. I'll open up a design. Now, you saw that flower design. And in that flower design, before I manipulated it and saved to sew, I'll go back to the root. It had no underlay. It didn't have enough overlap. So I wanted underlay to be added. I wanted the overlap to be added. And I wanted the density to change. But now, let's look at this Columbine logo. This is a very famous design of mine. When I first bring a design up, this is what I do, folks. It determines how well a design is going to run. I always look for the narrowest satin stitch. Let's say it's down here in this letter E. I grab my ruler. 1.4 millimeters is the minute satin stitch width. I measure it. 1.4 millimeters. That's telling me that design is going to work as far as the width. I look at corners also. We'll get that into a future class, but I look at corners that angle in and that angle out because that's why you bird nest, is when you have what I call hard corners. I don't have enough time to cover that right now. We will cover that indeed as time goes on. So I measure a width, and then I measure a couple overlaps. You see here I have, basically it's a satin stitch next to a satin stitch. It needs an overlap of 1 millimeter or more. Measure it, 2 millimeters. That's telling me before I run this design, it's got plenty of overlap. Here I have a fill stitch next to a satin stitch. It needs an overlap of 1 millimeter. Measure it. 1.7 millers. I've got plenty of overlap there. Now look also, because you'll see that there's lots of underlay. I see 3 strands of underlay right here and lots of underlay under the fill. So I'm going to run it on a piece of batiste, all right? File, save to sew. Well, you know what? In batiste, I'm going to choose I didn't digitize, because when I choose I didn't digitize, I'm telling the software that I have plenty of overlap and plenty of underlay. I'm looking at a design, and that's why you have 3 choices, okay? Because as I go next, if you were to look at the settings, actually the settings would work like this. That's turned off and that's turned off. That's the difference between Magic Wand and I didn't digitize. You see, because we automated it, you don't need to check anything. But if I process this, apply, yes, stabilizing, and boom. The only thing that happened is I changed the density in this design. You see, I always want the density to change. Now, if I came in and I hit File and Save to Sew, and I choose Batiste and I tell it Magic Wand, I have no overlap and not enough underlay, next, apply, and yes, tells me how to stabilize it, but boom. It's going to add more underlay, a lot more overlap, okay? I didn't need it in this design. Okay, so if I wanted to process it, and watch, I'll back out of that and undo the change, save to sew. I'm going to take Batiste and I'll choose Magic Wand again. But if I wanted to work with it like this, I would turn off the underlay. I do not need any more underlay. It has plenty of overlap. I will turn off the pull comp. Apply, yes. Stabilization, boom, okay? It did no changes. Basically, that's what I didn't digitize. I automated it. That's why you have the 3 choices. But when there was just one choice, Magic Wand, you had to have the control of turning those features on or off. Why? Because I'm looking at a design with plenty of overlap and plenty of underlay. I always want the density change. That's why Magic Wand, no overlap and not enough underlay. I digitize, some overlap but not enough underlay. I didn't digitize means plenty of overlap and plenty of underlay. It will become more clear in the future, because when we elevated it to the 3, I was able to, or DJ and I were able to alter the sequence. Basically what we're controlling is overlap and underlay. The density change you always want to take place from fabric to fabric. Different fabrics like different densities. I guess if you were getting started and were to choose one, if you're working with a stock design, folks, the one that I would choose from day one and save to sew, my choice would be I digitized. Basically, you're telling the software I have overlap, probably not enough, and that I could probably use a little more underlay. You see, most designs that I look at created in this industry have overlap, but in most cases, I'd say 70% of the designs I look at don't have quite enough. They're borderline. Some of them do, some of them don't. Most of them, though, do not have enough underlay. I digitize means I'm going to add more overlap, I'm going to add more underlay. Okay, I hope that answers the question. I'm not trying to confuse everyone, I'm trying to take you a little deeper. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on because I have a lot to cover and I'm going to go pretty quick. Now I'm going to pull rank. I'll tell you right now, folks, I can do that if I want to. I'm going to pull rank and I'm going to go a little further and deeper into it. So excuse me for going over time. I don't think a bunch of you are going to mind, other than maybe all my staff or all this staff that's online, but I don't think they're going to mind either. We've got the greatest support staff in the world. But I'm going to tell you right now, Kathy, I'm going to go over time a little bit. I want to talk about font technology. Font technology, you grab your text tool. We use a lot of fonts. You simply left click onto the screen, you get your letter A. Now, I'll tell you under tools and general options that you now have some choices. Under the environment, you're looking at the units and metric, the fort style, you have your machines, you can activate your grid, digitizing, but view is where I want you to go, because now, like when I clicked on that text tool and clicked, you saw that letter A. I can also institute, I don't have it when I teach normally activated, when I'm working on it myself, you now have on-screen text typing. This is a wonderful feature. When I select that, and click OK. No, most of you know you type your text up here. If you have on-screen text typing activated as you type, it comes up on the screen. Okay, you have on-screen text typing, almost 140 fonts within the software. Over here at the properties box, your testing is amazing because you have center alignment, left alignment, right alignment. You have absolute control over the alignment. Under his type, you can do it in normal. That's just a straight line. You have your circles with are your arches. You can select the monogram, although you have a monogram key. You now have pathing where you can create kind of a squiggle line and do it on a path. You also have your true type and a new true type circle, which allows you to do arches. So you have the ability straight, arch. You also have wonderful controls of italicizing letters, stair-stepping letters. You can choose your start points. Most keyboard fonts start left and right. You can tell it I want you to start right and left. You can tell it I want you to start from the center and work from the center out to either side. We do a lot of that when we're working with caps. When you're working with cap technology and finishing caps, most of the times your selection is going to be at the center. As you type multiple text or multiple letters within your text, you have a wonderful level of control. Most of you know it. When you apply it, it'll bring it up on the screen. Just one second. It'll bring the lettering up. Wait, I did something there. Anytime something goes wrong, it's always me. So let me type it again. Click apply. Okay, you have a wonderful level of control. The first level of control, you have 2 levels of editing. This one allows you to manipulate size just by pulling it in or out. Okay, you can manipulate the sizing. You have the controls from side to side. Okay, you have spacing controls in between your letters. You can also, once it's selected, go into shape. You have your second level of editing within shape. Excuse me. When I come into shape, why did that not take? Oh, come on. Now, nope, I don't have to break up the text, Kath. Unless they finally, if they added that feature, but it shouldn't have been added yet. You do a select. Do I need to break it up? Well, look at that. You just taught me. Okay. Right click, break up my text. Now as I do a select or go into shape, no, it's not doing it. Excuse me, DJ?
That makes it broken apart.
Yeah, break up text breaks it apart. I don't want the text broken up. Oh, no, folks, what am I talking about? The first time that you select, okay, you do, and here we go, Kath. I want to teach us both again. You have text, okay? You have manipulation of your size. You can stretch. You do not hit the shape. Hit your text tool again, Walt. When you click on your text tool, you get to your second level of editing, okay? Which allows you to shape, but you're now shaping with curves. You certainly can grab individual letters and move them within any structure. So basically 2 levels of editing that you have. One is for simple manipulation. Hitting the text tool again allows you to manipulate even more within there. So you've got your sizing, your spacing. Now, I want to point out something that's a highlight in the font technology in Floriani, and I want to talk very quickly about the trouble with fonts, okay? Because a lot of times you run fonts, and one of the things that takes place is when you run your font, they're never the same size. The problem with most font technology is, look, and I guess maybe I should have started like this. If I bring up a master's embroidery design, okay? And I am going to go over time, but I'm going to speed it up here and I'm going to cut out a little bit. But I think what we've covered has been pretty important. Okay, as I zoom into this lettering, when you look at a master's work, the one thing you'll see is that fonts are never the same size. See how the I is shorter than the T? That's because of the 2 constants in embroidery. The first one is called pull, the direction of the stitch and the T going up and down. The T is going to shrink in height. The letter I is going to get narrower, but the second constant is called push. The letter I is going to grow in height. It's going to get narrower, but it's going to get taller. That's based on density and thread weight. Thread has weight, measurable weight. a letter I next to a T, the I is going to grow in height, the T is going to shrink in height. Any master's work you look at, you'll see a differential in height. Look at my Columbine logo, and if we zoom down here into the W next to the E, so the E is taller than the W, because the E is going to shrink in height, the W is going to pull in height. That's been the problem with most font technology. Even in my software, look, this is a piece of software we took over and redeveloped, but see how the I is digitized the same size as the O? Well, when you run this, the I is going to get tall, the O is going to get short. No other software in the world that can do this, because when you come into File and Save to So, and I don't care what material type you choose, you pick your material type next, apply, and yes. Tells you how to stabilize, but watch what happens. Boom. See how much smaller the I is now than the O? It's the only software in the world that does that. Why? Because under your pull compensation, you have the ability, okay, not only to, number one, it's automatically controlled and saved to So. Pull has always been a part of most software. Push has not been. And you actually now have full push control. Almost no other software in the world gives you that ability. You not only have the ability to do it on both sides, you can choose one side or the other side. That is a highlight on the fonts. Do you understand? I hope you all understand what I'm saying. Fonts have always been digitized the same size. That's because the people creating it were graphic programmers, not real embroiderers per se. Okay? This ability to manipulate it, another reason to use Save to So, makes your fonts run better. Everything that I've put into this, I've tried to put it in there so it emulates a master's work. Fonts have never been digitized the same. Using Save to So with this kind of level of control and pull and push, it's duplicating, emulating a master's work. The other thing I want to talk about fonts that you have a whole series of text designs. The text designs are great. Look, my daughter Scarlett's a little angel, so I'll do this with her name. I'll put it into position, then I'll click on my keyboard letter T. I come in here and I'll now type the rest of her name. You have hundreds of font designs, okay, that you can put in here. I'll now put it into position. Also under text designs, it's not just like alphabets like this. You get a whole series of designs. So I can grab the monkey, bring it up on the screen. I can now hang the monkey from the letter L in her name. So you have not only this wonderful font technology, but with the text designs, you have a whole ability now to create whole designs just within the element of font technology. You have a monogram key. I'll talk about monogramming. Works with every font within the software, but when I click on it, I now have a 3-letter monogram. Works with every font, but we also gave you with the monogramming, you have an entire series of fancy monogram scripts. You can also use this as like keyboard texting. Select one that you like, apply it, and up it comes on the screen. But more than that is we not only gave you 45 different fancy monogram style letters, down at the bottom, signified by a green letter M, are the top 11 monogram styles within the industry. I use that one personally a lot. Click on it, up it comes. But when you have that green letter M to the left, you will now have a whole series of decor. The decor only activates with monograms with that green letter M. I want to put a border around that, select it, it will auto fit, and there you go. Each monogram style has its own series of decor. So as I apply another style, there's a whole nother series of decor you can now apply to that monogram style. And more than that, we've put into the software a whole series of monogram designs. These are additional borders that you use in your monogramming. You can also use these as wonderful borders for making your own private labels and such. The only thing I'll tell you about this is you bring it on and activate it. They're not auto size, so you'll have to put it into position and then many times come along the edge and just stretch it out to size it up a little bit, and then once again just put it into position. So you get a whole series of wonderful decor within the monogramming, but you also get a whole nother series of borders signified by the monogram designs. I'm going to go ahead and move on. You have certainly your applique feature, okay? Your applique feature in the software, you click on applique, any shape that you make, Just by clicking on it will simply turn into an applique. Now I'm actually going to use, because I'll bring this up right now, you have a whole series of pre-made applique shapes. Go into your pre-made applique shapes. Want to make any one of these shapes a design? Let's go ahead and do the bananas. Click on it and boom, it's an applique. But I'll tell you, one of the software's strongest features in all stitch types is its ability to manipulate to either other stitch types or to some very decorative stitches. What I mean by that, traditional satin stitch. When you have an applique though, you can always say, you know what, make me an E or a blanket stitch, and boom, it's a blanket stitch. You have the ability with appliques to utilize your motifs. You have a whole series of motifs within the software. You can select your motif and apply it. It'll apply the motifs to that applique. And then you have a whole series of symbols. Look, let me show you the symbols, because the symbols, number one, symbols are also designs that you can use to create wonderful stock designs, integrating or using them with your text. Now, why and where would you ever use a symbol in an applique making? Well, look, right here I have, under B, I have a banana. Okay, where's my banana? I know it's here. It's got to come up a little bit. Banana. Where the heck did my banana go? Here it is. No, that's corn. I don't know why I'm having this issue, because that could not have changed. Because what I can do, there's the banana, it's right there. No, it's because my white screen, okay? But what I can do is I made my applique. I can now say, look, I want to apply a symbol to that, and I can now border that banana with bananas. Let me just change the size here a little bit. And voila, on bananas, I'm going to make it look 3D because I have a white screen. I can border with bananas. The software, and I guess my point, within every stitch type, within every element, with all your appliques, because you not only have applique, you now have also our wonderful Appli-Stitch feature. Appli-Stitch is just, it's an applique made simple. It's a material. If you do not know, folks, if you haven't seen it, it's a material you lay down almost like a piece of stabilizer, and then when it's done, there's no pre-cutting the applique. You can simply tear it off. It's like a tearaway. It's amazing. You have an Appli-Stitch feature. So when you do Appli-Stitch, the difference is, and I'll just convert this to an Appli-Stitch, okay? Appli-Stitch simply puts a very narrow running stitch line to the inside, so that when you tear it off, it does not tear off from the center of the design. It keeps that material there in place. Another wonderful thing that you have in applique is you now have fabrics. So you can come in and you can apply all of these different fabrics. Now, we've put in all the Appli-Stitch fabrics. They're signaled just by the AS, but another nice feature in Total Control, you can scan in. We all have boxes of materials. You can scan those in and you can place them in that library. What this does, let's say I pick the burlap, click OK. It inserts your material type right into your applique. I think that's a wonderful feature. So you have your applique, you have your Appli-Stitch. You also have the ability to create cross stitch within the software. So you have your cross stitch, up it comes. We also added a couple of years ago the new tackle twill feature. Tackle twill is what's used in like Letterman's clothes and in jackets, or excuse me, shirts, baseball jerseys, split fronts and that. The different from a traditional applique is it's done with almost a zigzag type stitching. That is tackle twill right there. Tackle twill is a piece of material you can cut on a cutter, so it takes you into the whole element of doing all the sports jerseys and things like that. I'm going through these quickly. I just want to point it out. I really wanted to key in tonight into the editing, into a little bit about the fonts. Wanted to show you some of the other features. Now I just want to talk a little bit about the digitizing. Classes coming up are going to key in nothing but the digitizing. Now, manual stitch, I showed you a usage of that. I want to run through these very quickly. I'm going to show you the run stitch. When you create a run stitch, it's always a left click, right click, ends the sequence. Over here in the properties box, wonderful controls. You control your stitch length. I talk about length as being a rule to the running stitch. Length equals loft. My software is set with longer stitch lengths than most, but within every stitch type, in the running stitch itself, and this is getting to the creative side of the software. Standard is a one-time run stitch. This will start on the left and with the right. If I pick a 2-ply, it's a double. It's going to start on the left, move to the right, come back to the left. You then have a bean, which is normally a 3-time run stitch. The movement would be forward, back, forward. It's for a heavier run stitch. But if you're doing like a red work design, one of the elements that you have now is you can increase the amount of repetition that it does. 3, 5, 7, and 9. Want to utilize some batting material and make a red work design really pop? Pick a bean stitch with a running stitch application and go to 5 or 7 times. That means at 5 it's going to move forward, back, forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward, back, forward, forward, back. The more repetition, the greater sink, the greater loft, and the greater puff that you get to any application. You also have, anytime you use a run stitch, the ability to apply your motif stitches. Here are all the motif stitches within the software. You'll see them listed right below it. There's a ton. In Total Control, you can also create your own motifs. And then you can also apply your symbols. You can say, you know what, on that running stitch line, I want anchors. I don't know why, but you might want to do that. That's just in the running stitch. Single, double, bean, motif stitching, and your symbols. You have 2 different types of satin stitching, what's called an input satin path and a classic satin. Why? Okay, look, the input satin path and the why I created, I guess the easiest way to show you would be to bring up this design right here, exercise 3. It's how we corner in embroidery. And I talk about cornering a lot in my classes. There's 2 ways to corner, the wrong way and the right way. What a digitizer's done, he or she, is they've come from a straight element into a curve into a straight element. This is why you bird nest. The ability to, and the proper way to corner is what I call angle in and angle out. I want to come into the corner and out of the corner at the same relative angle. You see what it does is it stresses the corner much less, okay? This stresses it. This right here is why you bird nest. You have the same amount of stitches from here to here as you have from here over to here, okay? This is an issue. Well, when we used to use the input satin path, this is what you used to get as it made a corner. So we created, or we utilized, the classic satin. What the classic satin does, and I'll go ahead and activate it. Let me just add another color and I'll select it, is classic satin is called point counterpoint. So I would click here, then here, left click. Then I would click here and here. Now I'm coming into the corner, and you'll see that the way that I angled, okay, just a second, I did something wrong here. Why am I messing up tonight? I'm sorry, folks. That didn't mean to happen. But you can see as I'm coming into the corner, I'm angling into the corner, okay? That's the way that you want to create a corner. And again, it was able to be, when you are working with a classic satin, you are the angle, okay? That's as simply as I can put it. When you worked with the input satin path, that's what I wanted to do, it used to make your corners like this. Well, we changed the logic on the input satin path. When you do an input satin, you're basically going to left click. I'm going to left click the whole one side of the letter L, right click to get to the other side, left click, and boom, it'll do it. But you see what happened and what we changed. I'll turn this off. We instituted what we called fractional spacing. As it works now, it's trying to maintain the same distance to the inside as to the outside. What that did was force the curve. The point is this. The classic satin is probably the one I use the least now, because learning angles and putting them in that manner can take quite a while to learn how to do, okay? Because we changed the logic of how it goes around a corner, 99% of the time I'm now using input satin path. If you came from my era of digitizing, you'll like the classic satin. It was the only way we used to be able to do it. Because of that logic change, I now use, even though I come from my era, I now use input satin path because it makes such beautiful corners. It was created to overcome what was a challenge by changing the logic. Instead of getting this, you now get this. Use your input satin path most of the time. You have your, now the ability to manipulate a satin is a satin. The only thing you can do is you can change it into a fill. You have a steel stitch. It's input like a running stitch. Right click on it, you get a balance with satin stitch. Where would you utilize something like that? Well, very quickly, I'm going to open up a very quick design here. Let me just, oops, excuse me, I didn't want to input artwork. I wanted to load my backdrop. I'm going to bring in this basketball design. Look, a very pretty little design of a basketball. To digitize this, you certainly have your magic wand. So I would want to make the orange a fill stitch. I grab my fill stitch, grab the magic wand, come down here and right click on my color, digitizing. All that does fine, okay? So we'll just do that real quick. But now the issue comes with that satin stitch, because I should be able to choose, and I can pick my satin path. I want to change my color, so I'll pick the right color with a left click and a left click. It's on the screen, right click. I've chosen my satin path. I have the magic wand. I left click. I'll right click as soon as it's completed here. And that design is now digitized. But the problem is this. The artwork that I had for this, okay, was not great artwork, okay? So when you look at the black as it generates the stitches, I have really wide areas of the black right here, and I have very narrow areas. Let me hide the orange, okay? And let me hide the graphic. So we're looking at just the stitches. I have a lot of editing to do in a case like this. I could incur an hour, 2 hours of editing. So why that steel stitch is there is, look, I want all that satin stitch to be the same width. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring back up the graphic, and I'm going to, while I have that black selected, I'm going to go ahead and delete those stitches right there. I simply am going to do this. At this point, I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm going to measure the height of that basketball. 86.7. You have a wonderful artwork tool. I can come in and click ellipse, all right? I don't want to be digitizing right now, excuse me. I can click my artwork tool, click my ellipse, okay? I can then hold down the, oh, excuse me. Why did I just do that? Walt. Hold on one second. Operator error. I know I'm 10 minutes over. They're in the background telling me I'm going over. I'm still going to pull rank for about 5 more minutes and we'll finish up, folks. I do apologize, but I do want to show you this usage. So once again, I see that my artwork is not that great. Going to measure the height of that ball, so let's just call it 87.6. At this point in time, I can grab my artwork, grab my ellipse, and then by holding down the control key, I'll make a perfect circle, okay? And I'm just going to generate it. Size doesn't really matter. It was 87.6 because I can now come into commands, okay? And I'm going to grab the artwork so it's selected, come into commands, and I can say, you know what, I want you to be 87.6. I'll get the actual size, okay? Once it's the right size, I'm going to now grab it. I'm going to put it on top of that other circle where I have narrow and thick areas. So I've placed the artwork on top of the graphic, right click, and say convert it to a steel stitch. And you know what I've done just right there? I've just eliminated probably 2 hours of editing. The artwork tool is not always utilized enough, but realize with the artwork tool, you can create any shape. You can create a triangle, okay? I use it for bad graphics. Because once it's selected and then, or created, then selected, you simply can convert it. If I want to make that a fill stitch, I can come in and say, make it a complex fill. It's going to fill it. I can turn it into an applique. I can border it with a satin stitch, which is a balance with satin. The steel stitch is amazing from that standpoint when you're not working with really great graphics. I'm going to finish up and just show you on the fill. You certainly have the ability with a fill stitch. It is the easiest stitch to create, but it is also one of the most creative stitches because within a fill stitch, you have the standard, which is a normal fill, although you have selections. If you want to create hair, you create or utilize a random effect. You have different effects in a standard fill, but more than that, you have the ability to emboss. Embossing is very cool. Embossing just means when you select the shape and click apply, in a 3D mode, excuse me, you have to select it, then go into emboss. You've always got to select, and then click apply, and I'll create that shape in the fill. But one of the things that we added, that's what embossing is. One of the things that we added that I think is very, very, very cool, okay, is that you can also come under, I'll bring up a new sheet, come under and apply or import true type text. Now watch this real quick. I'm going to just type my name, Floriani, okay? Bring it up onto the screen. It's artwork. There's nothing embroidered about that. It's simply artwork. But at this point in time, I can hit File and Save As, okay? And then one of the things we opened up in Total Control is you can now save that design as an embossing pattern. So save it, because watch what I can do now. I can come in and I can make that same fill stitch, okay, or make a fill stitch. So I have all these wonderful embossing patterns, but watch this, because now, because of the ability to save as an embossing pattern, okay, I'm going to do one other thing. I'm just going to simply change the angle. Oops, excuse me, I didn't want to change the size. I wanted to change the angle. So I come into shape. I'm simply going to grab my angle stitch and change the angle. I always do this when I'm doing lettering. Now, it's selected. The angle is going to change. Select it. I'm under embossing, but that name Floriani that I just did is now in my embossing designs. Click apply, and this is very cool, folks. I think the software, while being you've got your magic wand. That's like auto digitizing in segments. You've got all of your traditional digitizing, but then within every stitch type, you have all of these wonderful features. Look at what I can control here. Now, it's finished. Okay, let me just change it to yellow. I think you'll see it all a little better. But I've just produced the name Floriani over and over again in that fill. I should have put a space before and afterward, and I would have had the proper spacing. That's uncanny. That's something that a master digitizer in their life will probably not be able to figure out the partition line sequence to create that effect. But because it's basically just mathematical beats, the programmers were able to give us this ability. My God, you can take your fill, you can bring in a true type text, save it as an embossing pattern, and apply it to your fill. Just within the fill stitch, you can apply all your motifs. You can apply different shapes. So you have a whole series of shapes now in the software that you can apply to your fill stitch. Click on shape, boom, up it'll come. Takes a second. You now have your shapes within your fill stitch. You also have the ability to create contour stitching. You all should know what that is. It scrolls from the center out. We added stipple stitching a couple of years ago, so you have stipple. Simply change your density and you'll change the effect on your stippling. So you can micro stipple, and then we finished development release last year of the wave. When you're in the wave and you select it, as you go into shape, you now have your Bezier curves. So you can move it, you can shape it, you can apply it, and it'll fill with that. Look, are those features that you're going to always use? But no, not necessarily. But as you go deeper into the creative side of embroidery, it gives you the ability for a lot of one-button pushing to make designs run better. The full complements of font technology, monogramming technology, the applique, the apple-stitch, the cross-stitch, the tackle twill, and then with each digitized stitch type, the effects that you're able to create. Now, I'm going to finish with this. It's going to take me 1 minute. You all know about the webinar, certainly, about the about the videos that we produce for your education. If you don't know, in the My Floriani Today page, you have your new Learning and Resource Center. There is an enormous amount of education that you can get out of there. But what I want to touch on is that over the last couple of years, I've had a great call for advanced digitizing techniques. We've put all these stitch types and the ability to manipulate them in the software, folks, but where do you utilize them, and what would you utilize them for? Well, look, something that I've done for over 4 years now without anyone really knowing is, you all know or should know, when you own the software, each month you get 5 new stock embroidery designs. Why do I give you stock embroidery designs each month? Because I'm a nice guy? Well, you want to know what, folks? Yeah, I am a nice guy, but there was another reason. Advanced education. Let me explain. One of the designs embedded in the software, okay, are these children's designs. Let's say that you had these kids' designs, and you pull this tiger up on the screen. Excuse me, let me grab it. Got to right click. Anytime you bring a design up and it's all highlighted, ungroup it. It means it's basically a zip. But if you ran this design, okay, you would see that the hair really looks like hair, that the grass really looks like grass, okay? Those are special effects using automated features in the software, but there's nothing there telling you what to do. Let's say you ran this design and you said, that technique on that grass is amazing. I want to use it the next time I digitize. Well, look, one of the reasons that I give you stock designs are this. The company that produces them in our computer language, the C2S language. That's our own format for our software. If you go into your sequence view and you select that green, it highlights, okay? One of the reasons I give you stock designs is this. You want to use that technique. Find the color, select it, and click on that plus sign. It opens it up. Right off the bat, you'll see that digitizer, he or she, when they created it, used the complex fill. Folks, simply click on the complex fill, because now up here in the properties box, it tells you everything that digitizer did. They used a standard fill with a random technique, with a stitch length of 3 and a density of 0.65. It tells you what underlay they used. It tells you what pull compensation and push compensation they used. Everything about that fill stitch, literally about every color, about every element, simply by selecting it up here, it tells you exactly what that digitizer did. See, that's the ability to read someone's designs. It can get deeper than that with stock designs, but this takes it to a whole nother level. It's in there for you. I've been hiding it for over 4 years. There's so much advanced digitizing learning already within the software. It's simply you bring up design that you've run that has the effect that you want, bring it up on the screen because they're in the C2S format, select it, go into the stitch type, and the story unravels itself right there for you. Look, I am already almost 30 minutes over. I know I have to stop. I couldn't help myself. I could still go for a couple of hours more. We will continue with this in the next webinar. The new series is starting, but what I've covered, I'm going to cover a lot more. I hope you've all enjoyed this. It has certainly been enjoyable for me. Teaching this process to all of you means more to me than anything else. I love you all. Hugs and stitches. Kathy, thank you. DJ, thank you. Staff, thank you. I'm sorry I went over so long, but I have really enjoyed myself tonight. Hugs and stitches to you all. Good night, folks.